Hello and welcome to this webinar as part of the SSP series, and in this one what we're going to cover is when we have to go and sell to a customer but we don't know and can't find out what their needs are directly. So we're calling this selling to unknown needs. Let me start by refreshing you on the single sales principle itself. There are three key elements to it that when added together get to the point of people deciding to buy. And those are the compelling need, the credible solution, and the perceived value. So when we've got those three things in line, then people will buy. And it's fantastic. It works a treat. The focus of it is very much around the compelling need. If we can get to the point of really understanding what the compelling need is, then when we come to demonstrate our proposition to the customer, to offer them our credible solution, we know what to target it against because they've already told us what those needs are. And these needs absolutely can't overestimate just how important they are. There are 3 videos available online in this series covering this area of needs. This is how important it is. We've looked at the power of emotions, how important it is to actually get to understand the emotional reasons why people will make certain decisions. We've looked at Socratic questioning, how we delve underneath the surface to find out way more information than we'll get as the first response to any of our questions. And we've talked about creating needs. That video looked at how to actually create a need when the buyer just doesn't know what their need is. How do we actually think more broadly, more creatively about this area of need? So, compelling needs, fantastic. Let's get them if we can. But we do have this problem where sometimes we can't just sell our credible solution against a compelling need because we genuinely don't know what it is or what they are. So in those circumstances, how on earth are we going to do the traditional, for very good reasons, features, advantages and benefits approach to selling? A feature being what the product is or what it has, the advantage being what it does, and the benefit being what it has or what it does or what it means for that particular customer. We've got an inbuilt challenge here because if we don't know who that particular customer is, or if we haven't got any information about that particular customer, then how on earth can we talk about benefits? It's almost impossible. So under those circumstances, we need to have a different approach to making sure that we're selling the benefits properly, to give us a best chance that we can possibly have of getting the benefits out there as quickly as possible. So that's what we're going to focus on as part of this webinar. When FAB doesn't work the way that it should, what can we do? Well, effectively what we're doing here is we're operating in the blind, in the dark. And the challenge of that is we can feel like we're fumbling around for stuff. We don't know where we're going. We don't know the direction of travel. We don't know of all of the features and all of the advantages of our products and service. Which ones should we talk about? Who knows? So if that's the case, let's not stumble around in the dark. Let's see how we can take the blindfold off, even if it's just to give us a tiny little bit of vision into how our product or service could be directly of benefit to a customer. So, why might we be in a position where this is the case, where we don't know? Well, there are at least 6 examples of businesses or environments in which it's almost impossible to know the direct needs of a particular buyer that we're talking to. The first one of these is when we're selling online. Yes, there are things that we can do, and I'm going to come on to those, but often you're putting something out there and just hoping that people buy it. We can't talk to them, we can't go and interview them, we can't sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with everybody buying an online product from us. So how do we do it in those circumstances? The second one is when we've got an elevator pitch type scenario. We can try to understand before we get in the elevator with somebody what they might need, what their desires might be, so that we can talk about the right things in that 30 seconds as the elevator rises. But the reality is, we probably don't know. Almost the definition of the elevator pitch is you get an opportunity with somebody you haven't come across before, and therefore it's really difficult to understand what their needs might be. Another area might be when you're actually going through a structured bid process, these things that take huge stacks of paperwork. When that happens, if it's a really, really well-structured bid and if the feedback that you're getting in response to questions that you're putting in is very, very good, you might stand a chance. But actually, in a lot of contract situations, the bid isn't structured perfectly, because life isn't like that. In addition to which, we might ask questions but think that other people might benefit from the answer, so that restricts us from asking the really direct ones we would do in a one-to-one situation. And the buyers might actually be hesitant in giving us the answer. So bids can be a real problem for understanding what the underlying needs are before we actually get into the situation of talking about our product and service. Fourth area, sometimes, let's be honest, we genuinely don't have time. There are videos in this range around making time to sell, and I would highly recommend you go and have a look at those as well, because it's really important to find the time to sell. But in those circumstances in which you just don't have it, and it's a genuine don't have the time, we might be under so much pressure that we can't allocate enough time to identifying compelling needs of our buyer. So that can be another block to really understanding what we need to talk about before we get the chance to talk about it. Another one would be the classic one of game playing. Buyers get trained in playing games and not giving out information. They know what their needs are, but they're going to play games with you and that sort of stuff. It happens. It happens a lot in business-to-business environments particularly, but also in some B2C environments, because people are getting a bit savvy about playing these games. And if that's the case, we need to work out how to deal with that situation as well. And then the sixth and final one of these six, but by no means is this an exhaustive list, is the situation where you've actually just got a multitude of buyers. It's a real mass market type product. And you can't go and sit down and have a conversation with every single one in that image, every single member of your audience, because, do you know what? Life's too short. So in those 6 areas, and in all the others, how do we make sure that we're selling things in an environment in which we are not completely blind, but we have some degree of visibility of what's going on? How do we create as much structured information as we can from the limited set of data, the limited set of information that we have available to us? The question is, how do we handle it? How do we deal with this situation where we can't just go and ask somebody? Well, the first thing is, let's not view it as a brick wall. Let's not just shrug our shoulders and say, do you know what? We can't find out what buyers' needs are, so we're just going to punt our stuff out, cross our fingers, and hope that somebody's going to buy it. It's possible, and people might buy it. You might get lucky. But I actually like to take the element of luck out of most sales situations and play to the strengths that we have. So instead of viewing it as a brick wall, what we actually need to do is view it far more as a porthole, something where we've got a bit of vision, even if it's really, really tiny, but from which we can imagine and we can be creative about what might exist outside of our limited set of vision that we've got. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through the porthole model for finding out what your buyer's needs might be. This is by no means going to be a perfect answer to anything at all, but what we're about here is about increasing the chances of you hitting the nail on the head when you're talking to your buyer, by looking internally at finding out how we can discover needs as accurately as possible in these sort of situations where we can't do it in the ideal way. So it's reading between the lines. If you want me to read between the lines, you'll need to make the font bigger, as this cartoon says. Well, yeah, we need to, but we can use a magnifying glass. We can use something to do it. And the porthole tool I'm going to take you through is one tool to use to actually look at how we can make that font bigger, how we can see more despite our naturally restricted vision. And it's amazing what can happen, actually. Take a look at this image here. What is it? I would hope that most of you will get the idea that it is somebody's passport. Now, you got a tiny, tiny little snippet of that particular image, and yet you were able to build the big picture. That is what the porthole model is all about. It's about saying, what can I read into the limited data set that I've got to create a full framed picture of what things could be, and then use that as my assumption, as opposed to guesswork or relying on luck. So, Let's have a look at Porthole. As usual with these wonderful acronyms, it stands for something, so I'm going to take you through the 8 steps of Porthole. They stand for parallels, options, research, tests, history, organisation, learning and evidence. And I'm going to take you through all of those because they are all really, really useful tools to use when trying to discover what needs might be. So let's have a look at the first one, the parallels situation. With parallels, what we're looking for is needs in other situations, in other industries, with other people that might be in parallel to or similar to the situation in which you find yourself blind. So for example, and this is one we use on our management training courses an awful lot, when EasyJet were looking at how to improve the turnaround time of their aircraft once they'd landed and before they took off again, which is a big cost element in their business, what they actually did was say, well, do you know what, we can't go and ask our low-cost operating competitors because, do you know what, they're not going to tell us. And the reason they're not going to tell us is because it's a competitive advantage in their business. And actually, they're not doing it any better than we are at the moment. So let's look for a parallel. Let's look somewhere else to get that information. And what EasyJet went off to do is they went and said, well, who else has to turn around a vehicle really, really efficiently and really, really quickly? And the answer was Formula One. So the EasyJet team actually went to a Formula One team, non-competitive situation, and said, can we study how you go about achieving the objective of getting the car out in 4 seconds, 5 seconds, 6 seconds, however long it takes. And by doing that and understanding how the team operated, they were then able to draw parallels with their business and dramatically improve the turnaround time of their aircraft. So if we can't go out and directly ask questions, look for parallels, look somewhere else. See what other businesses, what other industries, what other buyers might be doing that might be useful within your situation. So that's parallels. The next one in the Porthole model is to look at options. And let's take a scientific approach here, the wonderful world of hypotheses. What we need to do is say, well, do you know what? Here is a problem. We don't know what the need of this buyer will be. So let's make some hypotheses. And it's important that it's plural. It's important that it's more than one. We might say, well, it could be this. This might be the most important. This might be the most important set of needs that they have. We need to then be honest and say, do you know what? We don't actually know which one of these is the correct hypothesis. But then we gently introduce each of them and look for the reactions that we're getting. Are we touching on something that is important? Or are we getting the glazed over expression in people's eyes that says, that's not for me? If it's the latter, we move on to the next hypothesis, and then the next hypothesis if it happens again. What's important is to do this prep in advance, because otherwise we're guessing on the hoof. By working it out and stepping back and thinking before you go into the sales meeting, I wonder what their needs might be. It's effectively a build on the very first step of the decide process. Define your value proposition. But it's saying we're not going to define one value proposition, let's define a few because we're not sure which one will be most effective with this particular buyer. So that's what we mean by options. The next letter is R. Go and do your research. This is something that, let's be honest, most salespeople, not all, because there are these sort of introverted, nerdy, blue insights profile, introverted MBTI profile salespeople, and I fall into that category, so I'm allowed to call them nerdy. There are people like that out there who actually quite like the research and the data and the analysis and all of that sort of stuff. Most salespeople don't like that sort of stuff, and that's fine. But actually, do you know what? If you need to, if it's going to be useful to you, and you can structure it in such a way that you're motivated into doing this research because it is going to be useful in closing the deal, then why not go and do it? It could be, depending on the market and industry in which you operate, research that's already published, that's out there. There's an awful lot of industry research that goes on. You could commission your own. And when you commission your own, you could do a formal one. You can use some sort of internal technology if you have it. If you haven't, there are things like SurveyMonkey and so on that enable you to send questionnaires out to people, and that's all fine. You can also do it informally. Just ask people around. Ask people other than your buyer. In this situation, what might it be like? It's a bit like the parallel stuff, but going out and finding out what those parallels are to start with by broadening the scope of who you talk to about things. Get as much information as you can. One of the examples of this was looking at sports arenas and wondering what sports fans like, and then designing the sporting arena in such a way that it delivered those sort of things. So go out, as one of the big American football teams did, and go out and do research on your customers. What do they like outside of the sports arena? And if you take those sort of things, then bring them into the sports arena, and you will match their needs much more closely. So go and do your research. The T stands for testing, and testing again. This is particularly helpful when you're actually looking at online stuff, or it's most easy to do in an online situation. Because what you can actually do is just test one versus another, sometimes sequentially. Sometimes you can actually test them to different audiences all at the same time. You can actually do tests in parallel and see what works best. Think about your pitch. Pitch it against a particular set of needs, and then pitch it against another set of needs, pitch it against another set of needs, and see which one is preferred. Put the 3 apples out there. How many people pick the green one? How many the yellow one? How many the red one? It's basically by creating lots of different versions of the sales pitch that you can take for your product and service, see which one works better. Go out there and test it. Real world tests, as opposed to the hypotheses or scenario planning or options. The H stands for history. History is so important. I talked about this on one of the other videos in this sequence about history actually distorting what buyers' identification of their needs might be in the future, and doing that in a non-deliberate way. But actually, we can use history the other way. What has that person, what has that organisation done before? And again, infer from their previous behaviour what their future behaviour might be. If they made a certain decision in the past, the chances are that was driven by needs that they had. And as long as things fundamentally haven't changed too much, and that the buyer hasn't changed, and etc., the chances are you're going to stand a good chance of getting the needs right in the future as well. So don't forget to look back in time. What has happened with that individual before? It might be with your relationship with them, but it could also be with other people in your organization's relationship. In a lot of sales environments, you take over a customer from your predecessor, and then at some point you hand over that customer to your successor. And if you do that, make sure the history is in place. Make sure we know what has happened in the past, and most importantly, why it has happened. We can also look at the organization. The second O stands for organization. If we're selling into an organization as a whole, then we haven't just got to think about the buyer. We need to think about the whole organization. And by doing that, we can then start to understand what some of the underlying needs might be. Because even if the buyer isn't willing to tell us, organizations publish stuff. The chief executive writes reports in magazines and newspapers and journals and trade press and all of that sort of stuff. There is an awful lot of information out there about our customers, and some of it will at least have clues, if not really clear identification, of what it is that that organization is after. And if that's the case, then use that information. That can help guide us when we're selling against unknown needs, because we've got a bit of an indication from the rest of the organisation as to what those might be. Broaden your scope of looking at the organisation. The L stands for learning. By learning, what we're talking about is not just learning from their organisation, learn from your own organisation. Learn from industry documentation, learn from the library, learn from this wonderful resource that we have access to called Google. Go and do some research yourself. It's not just about directly going and asking buyers what their needs are, or people in their organisation what their needs are, or taking surveys and samples and all of this sort of stuff. Go and find out from your organisation who else has had contact with that organisation, and what was it like? What happened last time? And importantly, why did that happen last time? Because that will start to give you a really good indication of what the needs might be before you go in. You'll find out what works and what doesn't work if you can learn well from past experience. The E stands for evidence. Finally, if we're going to do all of this sort of stuff, if we're going to learn from history, and if we're going to learn from other people in the organization, and if we're going to take over an account from somebody and hand it on to our successor later, we need to keep the evidence. CRM systems are another thing that tends to be a bit of a Marmite type thing for salespeople. I hear an awful lot of stuff with people complaining about CRM systems. We use a CRM system here. I've got complaints about it. I find it a bit clunky and difficult to use, and do I really have to? And I'm an introverted, blue, insights profile, nerdy type salesperson. So if I find it difficult, imagine what you're like if you're on that sort of red, yellow, outgoing side. It's hugely difficult. We need to, though, accept the fact that however imperfect the system is, it can be hugely powerful. And it will only become hugely powerful if we put good quality stuff in. Like any system, you get out what you put in. So if we can put in really good evidence about what happened in the past, and most importantly, why certain things happened in the past, we can build up a massively powerful database of evidence about buyers' behavior and buyers' needs. And if we can do that, even in circumstances in which they don't tell us what those needs are, we stand a really good chance of guessing them correctly because we've done the work behind it. So that is the porthole model for understanding unknown needs and being able to sell benefits against unknown needs. Look for parallels in other organizations. What other similar businesses in similar type industries, even if it's just a tiny segment of that operation, what do they do? And how might that be similar in the organization into which you're selling? Make sure you look for options, for hypotheses and so on. Look outside the narrow focus of this is what I think, and think about what else could it be and what else could it be. Test and test and test these hypotheses again and look for the indications that you're hitting the nail on the head. Make sure you do your research, formal research, informal research, published research, your own commissioned research. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're not sure, go and ask the questions of mass market groups. If you can't ask an individual, find similar people and go and do that level of research. In an online environment, works really well to have a testing out there, different versions of something, and see which one works better. It can also work in non-web-based selling as well. Go and see what works better. Use different posters, use different literature, and see which ones seem to grab people's attention. Ask them, what did grab your attention? That will enable you to test different approaches to things. Look at the history, what happened in the past, and use history as a bit of a guide, not a perfect predictor, but a bit of a guide towards what might happen in the future. Look across your buyer's organization. What else can you find out about that organization, and where can you find it from? That might give you a steer, a little guide, a little help along the path of identifying what those needs might be. Look at the learning within your own organization. Make sure that you go and talk to the people who've dealt with that buyer before, who've dealt with that company before, who've dealt in this sector, dealt in this industry before, and go and learn from them. Get excited about finding out new approaches, new thoughts about things, new ideas, new concepts, new theories about why something might work and why other things might not work. Go and do your learning. And then to make this easier in the future and to make sure that you can benefit from all of the work that has gone in so far, make sure you keep your evidence. Gather it up, use whatever CRM system, whatever filing system you use to gather that evidence and keep that evidence so that it can be used successfully in the future. So that's our webinar around selling to unknown needs, tying in benefits in a situation where you just don't know what the needs are, where you don't have the opportunity to have that one-on-one open conversation with a buyer. I hope that's been helpful. As usual, please have a browse around the site and have a look at the other videos that capture your attention. That will help us to understand what the needs might be. That's our bit of testing and research going on. But also, again, a piece of research that we do. If you are not sure that we've covered the area you want, drop us an email, use the web form available, and just let us know what you would like us to cover in the next set of webinars. Thank you very much.